guys, checking in with you today. A little bit of a series that I'm going to run for the next few weeks, largely looking at just topics on football and some of the considerations for players, coaches, and associates within the game that can hopefully just build up some discussion and, yeah, just open up some lines of thought for people. And obviously for myself, just something that I can share with you and hopefully get a bit of a discussion going with you guys out there about ways that we can look to develop the game. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about how we'd look to develop a winger. I'm not necessarily pointing in specifics of teams, types of teams, age ranges, etc., but just a little bit of a brain spill about some of the ideas that we'd look to try and develop when building for this particular position. So what is it we kind of look for with a winger? If we're having a little bit of a think about it, some of the technical, physical attributes, with a winger, I think you think about the best wingers in the world. So Cristiano Ronaldo back in the day. If I'm thinking right back, players like Joaquin, Laurent Robert, lots of interesting, sparky, flary players that obviously have a lot of technical attributes and technique that they bring to the game. So a lot of the time, it's one of the more exciting positions that we talk about, and for this reason, I think it's a nice way to kind of start and look at some of the attributes that we can look to develop. Technically, like we said, they're generally going to be some of the better players technically in your groups. And with that in mind, they can bring a lot of challenges of how do you look to manage them, both their technical attributes and develop them, but also the person psychologically. I certainly had periods playing on the wing and found it both an exciting and a frustrating position compared to different positions that I played. Generally, I take a place on the team in a lot of the clubs that I played in. But yeah, it's an interesting debate to kind of bring up as a first one. Technical attributes, I think you'd look generally, you think of the area of the pitch they're going to be in. You want good crossing. You want a player that might have the ability to cut in and shoot and create chances. Good technical skills for dribbling, receiving, getting the team up the pitch on the move. There's so many things that a winger needs to have, and it's well, where do you really start? You know, your technical attributes, you want them to be good dribblers. So I think you'd want lots of dribbling exercises, different paces, receiving the ball with a little bit of pressure on them, but how quickly can they get it out of their feet and look to run with the ball as well. Of course, periods in transition where they do look to counter and run with the ball. There's a lot to work on with that. Physically, I think, ideally your winger's probably going to be a quick player, someone who can get past a defender, someone who can whip in across, someone who could go on, take a couple of players on and shoot and might score you a goal individually that way. One of my favourites was always Hatem Ben Arfa, a bit of a maverick, but a player that could, take the ball and individually change the game with one moment of mastery, and that's why wingers are so important. It's so important to manage as well. Physical attributes, again, I think you'd want them to have a little bit of bulk because they're going to have to resist challenges a lot of the time. Sometimes you'll get quite a thin winger. I'm thinking your Jesus Navas type, or going right back in the day to a kind of Keith Gillespie, a winger who's skinny, fast, and runs down the line purely to get crosses in. I think if you're going to have a winger that looks to kind of attack the area a little bit more as well, they're going to need some bulk in order to resist them challenges that come from fullbacks, incoming centre midfielders that are recovering as well. So yeah, you'd look to have your winger doing a lot of kind of gym work, building up a body as well as lower body to kind of build power and resistance in them situations. And then I think really a big one as well, especially for coaches out there that are listening, psychologically, um, managing a winger can be really difficult. Like I said before, I've played on the wing, and it can be a very kind of lonely role. But at the same time, you want to be connected to the team and making things happen and setting your teammates up. But it can be very individualized in terms of that's a position where you can at times, I know I've mentioned some players, you can be expected to kind of create that one moment of magic. So it becomes a bit of an individualized sport at that point. So how do you manage your winger to keep going if he's having a bad game and produce you that moment? Because it could be via setting up another teammate or making the inroads that create the opening for something to happen. That's something that we have to consider as coaches as well. So psychologically, what do we look to do? My first thoughts really are you want to just encourage with your winger. Yes, you're going to have to get stuck into them at points to stay part of the team shape in transitions and making sure that they're part of the unit, and sometimes they're going to lead your press. So really important that you kind of, I think with the out of possession stuff, that you're giving a lot of information and feedback to them, but at the same time encouragement to make sure that their head's in a good place. The game could be going really well for them. It could be an absolute disaster for a winger. But if you're on side and you've got their trust, then they're players that you might have to invest a little bit more in, because generally a little bit of talent, people will look at them, and the psychological effects of it can be that they end up being a kind of more flary character. You only have to think about players. If we're talking about the biggest clubs in the world, you've got a Gareth Bale, a Dembele. If I'm thinking to Bayern Munich, Frank Ribery. These players, they often come with big characters as well, and they have to express that, and they have to feel like they've got the support of their coach. Because a lot of the times they might have the fans on the back, teammates on the back, opposition might be getting stuck into them, thinking they're on top. They need a coach that's really on side, and obviously a lot of that comes through actions and your selection of them, and the amount of detail you give to them in training sessions, etc., etc. But I think also the message that you give them can play a big part psychologically as well. So what kind of, if we were to look at kind of a quick kind of plan to try and get through to these players, how would it look, the ways that we look to try and kind of build them technically, physically? I know we mentioned physically, that would be kind of a lot of generic gym work, power exercises, building your muscles for explosivity. Well, if we're talking about the training ground as well, then you might have your resistance sessions that are building the kind of team physical strength as well, but also with the individualized stuff, if they're doing an individual development plan or whatever, you'd want them having some hard sprinting, ideally with an end product at the end. So you're doing your kind of tactical periodization where you're hitting them physically, but also getting kind of some of the technical things that will come out in that session as well. If I'm thinking about sessions, individualized sessions, yeah, really important. Like we mentioned, hopefully they've got an action plan, things that they can recognize themselves that they might need to improve to make their game better. Ultimately, players are always going to be on your side if you're taking the time with them, because they should want to be better themselves, because if that leads to them getting a place in the team or in the higher levels, getting a contract and making more money, then any help's going to be, they're going to be open ears for it. So yeah, lots of individual stuff. I think if you can get it opposed at times, that's great. Sometimes though, unopposed will be the best thing to build the skills up. So it could just be as simple as run it at cone. How do they dummy to go round it with explosivity and then get the shot off? It can be that simple. And then later on, you might want to build in your competition, because they got to hone the skills first, and then when they're effective with it, then you can look at bringing defenders in, maybe multiple defenders as well. Stories and stories of Cristiano Ronaldo when he was at Manchester United, just going over and over again on the individual work, and all the work that he did alongside the team stuff that obviously eventually made him that player. In terms of equipment, you might want to go around cones, like I mentioned, mannequins. You might want to set up targets in the goal. You might want to set up targets in the area for your crossing. You might want to have slaloms that they have to go around, cut inside and cross with the weaker foot, sorry, or if it's the stronger foot, cut in and try and whip one into the back post there. Different types of crosses: front post, back post, driven, lofted. You can link it up with the strikers if so needs be to add that little bit of realism as well. And yeah, there's loads of creativity that can be added with that. In terms of team sessions, I think a lot of clubs look to kind of zone in on that particular area. I think personally the best thing is to stick to a kind of phase of play, because that's more realistic, as in the moments where the team might be switched over to one side and then the switcher play gets it out to your winger for them to attack the goal. I think you can't really replicate that when you're doing kind of a boxed in practice, which is only the quarter of the pitch, because the realism and the expectation for the defender is that they will hit your winger. So if you are doing that kind of practice where it's kind of cuts off on the 18-yard line and you only use the one side of the pitch, I think you can run into problems with that, because the defenders know it's going to that particular winger and they're ready to kind of close in on them, and you might not get the same success. So for me, ideally, I think you'd look to kind of do a phase of play, maybe limit your touches in the central third to 2 touches and look to encourage the ball out wide, or add the condition that you have to hit both channels in order to attack the goal. That way you're obviously encouraging the ball to go to the channels and get loads of time for your wingers on the ball, hopefully combining with centre mids and fullbacks as well. So it'd be a really effective practice. In terms of principles for your team, I think, if you're an attacking team, that can affect it, that, you play a nice expansive game and loads of time in matches. Ultimately, and we'll come on to it in a minute, it's a long-term process for your wingers, especially at youth level. So it will come through vicarious experiences and all them failures that they have, and working out what works and how they can get past defenders with the tools that they've got. Or, David Beckham was a fantastic winger for years and years and years. Wasn't brilliant at getting past players, but he had the ability to put an unbelievable cross in on a sixpence for players that, caused problems across Europe while he was at Manchester United, and then obviously continued that with Real Madrid as well to an extent. But yeah, the principles in the team can affect it. If you're playing and your team's probably a bit weaker in the league and they have to kind of stay boxed in and defensive, that might mean your winger ends up kind of tucking in and becoming a bit more of a central player, and then, in them instances, your chances on goal are probably going to come from counter-attacks where you need to sprint up the pitch very quickly. If I think of Newcastle's my team that I kind of follow, St. Maximin's your standout winger, and he's probably played that role where they've been taking a lot of pressure in games and relied on him to get them up the pitch and burst away. Not to mention just teams that kind of are struggling in the league, but also when you think about situations in a game where, you might be a successful team, but if you're winning 1-0 with 5 minutes to go, likelihood is you are going to take and accept a lot of pressure. So they're the moments where the wingers look to kind of burst away and fulfill that role in the team as well. So really important position. Not that there's a position that isn't important, but, in terms of completing your depth and getting the team up the pitch and sometimes getting a breather for the rest of the team, wingers are absolutely essential. And yeah, just kind of to round this up, because I know I'm going on here, it's a long-term development of a winger. They can come a lot of the time from central players that end up getting pushed out wide. It could be circumstances in a team that you're missing a player in that position and they end up getting kind of shifted out there, but might have the attributes, skills, quality, pace that suit that role, and they can build into it. It's a position that's that's really good, I think, for building a player technically, like your Cristiano Ronaldo, that could end up going and being a forward when their body changes and in different teams with different principles. So it has to be kind of looked at with a long-term perspective. Obviously, the short term of it, I think the short term ways that they can affect it are some of the things that we've mentioned with their individual training and with your team sessions, looking to build some principles in place that can look to allow them to kind of express themselves. But yeah, I think a lot of it's individual work, and they've got to really like look to build themselves holistically, physically, psychological work to build in them coping strategies as well. But look, I've really enjoyed going through some of these points with you. I'll be checking back in tomorrow, so don't be afraid to leave a comment. Let me know any topics that you want to hear, and we'll go from there. So cheers, guys.